Hey guys, welcome to the Rookies Podcast. This week we've got the Jared Wilson with us, and we're going to have a little discussion on the gospel, shocker, and gospel centrality, because Jared's that guy. And
Shouldn't we
Jared,
all
why
be that
don't we
guy?
just
Come
start off?
on. Shouldn't we all be that guy?
We should all be that guy.
Okay.
But but you've claimed the mantle as lead gospel-er.
All right.
So you're in the lead. But how was Sunday for you guys up at Liberty Baptist Church?
Oh, wow. Sunday was great, actually. I've been through January, and it'll continue through February. I've been traveling every other week. So I've only been in the pulpit, 2 Sundays in the last month or so. And so it's good to be back with the church fam. And we had a good number of visitors who, even first-time visitors this last Sunday that I got to meet, which was really neat. And it was good. It was an exciting time to be with the church family.
Awesome. And you guys are still in 2 services, working back towards 1 service eventually, right?
Yeah, that's we've gone through different iterations of the solution to that problem. We're approaching. We're not there yet. It's not imminent, but it's on the horizon, maybe distant horizon, probably within this year, of needing to add a 3rd service, which which we will not do, but it's just sort of pressing for us, the conviction that we have to be a 1-service church. We just don't know how to do that. We've been going to, as you know, Colin, once a month, the last Sunday of the month, we meet at the elementary school down the road so we can all be together. And so that's an option, perhaps, that we just move to the school every week. But for some of our folks, that is just a little confusing. We've got this perfectly fine sanctuary. Why would we knock ourselves out transporting stuff every week? And so we've looked at existing spaces in the area. They just don't seem to exist. We've got a real estate guy who's on our expansion team and kind of heading that up, and he's always looking, and it just doesn't, like, those spaces to purchase, just don't exist. And so we've looked at, are there churches that are needing to either upgrade and we can move into their old building, or there are churches that are actually somehow needing to downgrade, and we can look into their buildings. We've looked into building ourselves on our property, and we're at the point now where we think the thing to explore is remodeling what we've got, not building a new structure, but redesigning our current structure. So it's there's all good problems to have, but they're just things that a lot of us have not done yet before. So I've never been a part of a building campaign or a expansion project myself. So and none of the other guys have either. So it's just a little bit of a stressor,
Isn't the Southern Baptist tradition, though, when we do a building campaign, to start preaching Nehemiah? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Well, maybe. I've been trying to think of what we're going to do next. We're finishing Acts in a few months, I think, and so maybe Nehemiah is the way to go. That's a good word, Rio. I appreciate that.
Build a wall, build a building, same thing.
Build that wall.
Yeah.
Can we say that anymore?
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I think. I don't know. Moving on. How's the Pastoral Training Center going for you guys? This is number 3?
This is number 4, actually. And we started last fall, so we're, I think, 5 months, maybe 6 months. I don't know. Yeah, we started last fall, so we're 5 months, I think, into the 18-month residency, and it's going really well. Colin, appreciated you being part of the inaugural residency, and yet you guys probably got the shortest shrift out of everybody because it was brand new. It was an experiment. There was a lot of you, so you didn't get a whole lot of one-on-one time. I've learned with each successive one how to refine. And one of the things that I've done each time is take fewer guys so that each guy has more, one-on-one time, and there's even I think opportunity for more closeness among the cohort when there are fewer guys. At the same time, you end up having to say no to more people, which I don't like to do, but it's going really well. I've got 6 residents this time around, and the PTC ladies just met at our house last night, and one of the wives is her due date, their first baby. The due date was today, so her husband, resident, came with her, and he and I just sat in the garage and watched The Magnificent Seven the whole time the ladies were meeting. So he got a little additional kind of 2.5 hour, PTC meeting just with me last night, and it was really great. We talked about ecclesiology, we talked about all kinds of stuff. It was really cool. So it's a really sweet season. Things are going really well with it, and I figure out how to adjust and improve and everything else each time we do it.
Well, I know you've changed books as you've done different groups to kind of tailor them to the group of guys that you've got. And Daniel's getting ready to embark on on something very similar with a group of guys. Yeah. So any words of wisdom on books that he can't miss giving to these guys?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, it just depends on what your focus is, Colin. As you know, like when we started, y'all did a lot of 9 Mark C stuff, and they did a good, we spent a good amount of time on like membership and church discipline and those sorts of things. And what I discovered was you guys were pretty well versed in that stuff already. Like in the impression that I had was that it was somewhat redundant for the guys that may be a little bit behind or deficient in those areas. Just being in the ecosystem of our church kind of brings them up to speed. The new membership class, going to members meetings. And so I've pretty much done away with most of those, and have replaced them with with a focus on the biblical qualifications for eldership. So we have a whole month that we spend on hospitality. We read a book by Christine Pohl called Making Room. That's sort of an academic look at hospitality in the Bible and church history. We do a book on self-control. We do a book on gentleness, a book on the pastor's family. So just kind of looking at those qualifications. But if I had to say, like, what's the one book, it'd be really hard. But if I had to say, what's the one book? The first book that everybody reads has been the same all 4 residencies, which is Ray Ortland's The Gospel, How the Church Portrays the Beauty of Christ. And so that kind of sets the theme, the tenor for what we're trying to do spiritually, theologically and sort of devotionally through the residency. So that might be the one that I would say, something like that, if not that book.
That's really helpful. I'm unfamiliar kind of with what your residency looks like, but that's something that the Lord has blessed us with. I got here about 3 years ago, and he's just brought several young men who are called to bivocational vocational ministry or the chaplain corps in the National Guard. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, all right, Lord, you put them all here. Now, how do I best train them? And so it just started this year doing like a 3-part thing over like personal, like growth, spiritual. So Don Whitney's personal spiritual discipline stuff, and then doctrinal things, and then finally preaching. And so I am looking for resource, and I just wrote down everything you said to try to figure out what I'm going to be doing. But it's really exciting to see young men and even some older men. My dad is a part of it. And so getting to help train them and lead them as they learn what it looks like to be in the pastor role or whatever it may be. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, no, that's great. One of the adjustments that I've had to make, so not this current residency, but the previous one, where I was kind of prioritizing younger guys who may be a little inexperienced, trying to get them at kind of the foundational stage of thinking about ministry before, I realized a guy could go through the whole 18-month thing and in some ways still need to be in the oven a little longer, you know, like,
Sure.
and so I thought maybe let's prioritize guys who are a little older, maybe who already have some ministry experience, so that we're best positioning them to be able to send out when we're done. And that was really successful in our last residency. I had 2 guys, in fact, who had already served as senior pastors at churches before. And most of the other guys had either student ministry experience or other kind of vocational church experience. The guys were a little bit older, and it just, when we were done, man, it just felt so good to be able to kind of like, man, green light for all you guys, like, go run, you know, take after it. But then this most recent one, I just didn't have applicants like that. Nearly all of the applicants who even looked, you know, right for the residency were, again, on either the young side, inexperienced side. And so I had to kind of think, all right, I can't pigeonhole what it's going to be in terms of the candidates or the residents, because I can't control who's applying. I mean, you know, you can restrict, you know, things, I suppose, but I don't like to do that, because I just want to see who's around and who wants to do it. And so I've had to kind of adjust. So the conversations that I have in terms of, you know, discipleship encounters, are one-on-ones, those are a little different. The previous guys, certainly we were talking about spiritual disciplines and, you know, their spiritual life and their marriage and things like that. But we were talking more about vocational placement and more advanced sort of things. With these guys, we're like right at the beginning. You know, some of them, I've got 2 single guys. Some of the guys, like, they don't have kids yet. I mean, it's just very, not necessarily basic, but just more, you know, introductory sort of thing. So I've had to be somewhat open-handed on how I approach, you know, the focus, just based on, you know, what, you know, who the Lord provides, who the Lord is sending us in that time.
And I think that's what's really important, is understanding, like, your vision for the whole residency is this big, but then whenever those guys get there, because of who's there, it needs to focus on these things. And Lord, I mean, I'm only 6 weeks into mine and learning to be flexible and figuring out what needs to happen. And but it's exciting, you know, to see the Lord place people here, and then to see how they grow, even how quickly it's happening here. So that's exciting.
Yeah. And once you establish a reputation for this kind of thing, leadership development, investment in future ministers, or, you know, or just, you know, serious discipleship of, you become a magnet for, you know, word gets out. Oh, I can go there, and actually they'll invest in me. They'll train me and disciple me. So I advise, like, any church, you know, of any size, to even start small, start with one guy, you know. But if you kind of develop a reputation, develop a rhythm for it, I think the Lord, you know, in some ways rewards that and thinks, okay, I can trust you with more. And if you'll be training and sending, I'll start sending you more people.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, when, you know, you're talking to the guys about their life and their home, and not drifting away from the gospel, not just dogmatically or, you know, structurally in the church, what do you typically point to as things that they need to watch out for, and how we drift away from it?
Yeah, there's a couple of areas. One, in terms of an obvious focus for pastors or aspiring pastors, is in preaching. And one of the things that I've discovered just over the last number of years is, even those who are identifying with the quote unquote gospel centered thing, right, with the movement, the paradigm, what have you, even those who say, yeah, that's me, you know, not just guys who are like, I don't know, or I'm not sure I belong in there, but even guys who are kind of sold out, who kind of wear the label, they still struggle in their preaching to preach Christ from every text. Sometimes they, you know, assume that the gospel can be somewhat more implicit. Sometimes they equate tacking on an invitation to a sort of standalone sermon that really doesn't have, you know, gospel content in it, as you know, being gospel centered. And certainly that's better than no good news at all. You know, good news that shows up at the end in a little cameo appearance. That's better than no good news, because people can still hear and believe. But the ideal is that we are figuring out what Spurgeon talks about, the road from the text to the metropolis of the scriptures, which is Christ. And for some reason, it just seems like a lot of guys struggle with not just how to do that. I think that answers some of it, but the impulse to do it, like they don't even think to do it. So it's not just a matter of a hermeneutic. It strikes me as almost a matter of spirituality, of devotion, because if we are regularly ourselves close with Christ, investing in our friendship with him, it's not a no-brainer, but it's almost a no-brainer. It's kind of like, well, of course I would preach Jesus. Like in some ways I've got to temper my enthusiasm to get to Christ, to make sure I'm not jumping over the text and that I'm actually faithfully preaching that road and not somehow, doing some kind of acrobatics over, sound exegesis and everything. That's just something that I see. It became sort of a recurring joke, although they felt very chastened by it. In our last residency, in the second preaching lab, in your residency, Colin, we only did one preaching lab, but since then we do two, and part of that is just to gauge progress and give guys an opportunity to improve and make adjustments and things. But in the preaching lab, actually it was the first preaching lab for those guys, there were more references to Taylor Swift's connection to the Chiefs than there were to the resurrection of Jesus. And so in the final concluding remarks, I literally said that. I said, guys, you talked about Taylor Swift more than the resurrection. And they're all like, whoa.
Please tell me they all failed. Please tell me
no,
you failed all of
they
them.
didn't fail. But leaving out the resurrection is a very common problem. I don't know if that's such the Reformed sort of grasp of the gospel. The common Reformed grasp of the gospel is very much cross-centered, which I think is fine. But sometimes that turns into cross-only. Misunderstanding the apostolic shorthand, right? We preach Christ crucified, or I've resolved to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified, or the preaching of the cross. But they forget, right, that, 1 Corinthians 15, that the good news is not just that Christ died for our sins and forget in accordance with the scriptures, but that he rose on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. And so when I said that, they all just kind of like you could hear it settling on them. They're like, whoa. And then it became kind of a recurring thing, like, we got to make sure we talk about the resurrection more than Taylor Swift, There's just something about, I think, in preaching that tends to kind of predominate our thoughts. We want to get the text right, and so it's very good that guys are focused on that. We want to communicate well, so guys are really, focused on their organization, whether they manuscript or do notes or whatever, however they're, just making sure that they preach well, they sound right, their oratory is engaging or creative or what have you. But somehow in the midst of that, they're not doing that work of preaching Christ. And over time, that's shaping to a people, right? If, the best that Christ deficient and yet exegetically, precise sermons can do is just make really intellectual, Bible informed people. But that's not our goal as pastors. Our goal is that would be a means to Christ likeness. Not that we would be Bible, deficient, but that, the word of God would be dwelling in us richly, not just, stuffing our heads, but, so that's like one area, I think, in preaching. But that's connected to the other area of drift, which is, I think, just personally, there are guys who subscribe to gospel centrality as a paradigm, but they're not really gospel centered in person. And I think that may be largely responsible for the move, the move away from gospel centrality in evangelicalism. Why the tribe has sort of split up, fractured, balkanized. There's not one cause of that. It's and that's kind of what I talk about in the book is the different sort of stressors that kind of led to that fracturing. But one of them, I think, is people bought into the framework or into a kind of a ministry philosophy the same way we used to have bought into attractional or seeker sensitive or whatever. This was just, oh, this isn't that. I know that doesn't work. Here's the new thing. There's a publishing and conference machine around this. So I have now found my people. And that just is an artifice that somehow belies the fact that we are spiritually not ourselves in-person gospel-centered. And if I'm not in-person gospel-centered, after a while, the paradigm's going to feel weak and fragile and arbitrary and not like it's getting the job done. You know, when now I'm faced with all kinds of things in the culture or in my church, and I don't see results, I begin to think, oh, this doesn't work. And so I'm going to move on from it. And that's a result of a spiritual dryness, really.
So you mentioned preaching, and we talk about the gospel centrality in preaching. And one of the questions I had with that is you talked about, which I haven't shaken it off, that more Taylor Swift references were made than the resurrection, but I'm sure. But with that, in this institute or when you're talking to guys, really this question is twofold. How do you encourage guys in, like, practically in their sermon prep to make sure they don't do what, I think it was Graham Goldsworthy who said they just tack on the gospel at the end, which, you know, a cameo is still better than, like you said, nothing at all, but we still don't want to be predictable. Like every time our people hear us go, okay, well, here is the gospel now. So what are some like practical ways you tell them, hey, like I know personally be, you know, gospel centered, but in preaching, how do you saturate the message with the gospel? I guess instead of just tacking it on. And then second question would be, do you see abuses of the gospel centrality movement in preaching? Would kind of be my second one, but the first one, then second.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the first question is really, I mean, it can be lengthy because there's a variety of things that we can do. I have used Sidney Greidanus's sort of Christological method as a way of giving, you know, my students at Midwestern or the residents, for lack of a better word, a variety of moves that they can make from the text to Christ, so that they're not kind of stuck in a rut. And you know, those moves are of course dictated by the text that you're in, the genre, the content, of course, and then you know, the context, etc. So that kind of, you know, can kind of keep us from being in kind of a cookie cutter, one note sort of thing. So there's a variety of things you can do. You can look at what Greidanus calls longitudinal themes, particularly if you're preaching an Old Testament text. This is where, you know, most guys, you know, struggle, is preaching Christ from the Old Testament. But sometimes in the New Testament, you know, if Jesus isn't explicitly in that text, I'm deeper into an epistle and I'm looking at some practical stuff or something. You know, longitudinal themes, right? So how, if I'm charting something like love or justice or something that goes across the canon of Scripture, how do I demonstrate, either by cross-reference or just, you know, my own connection in the New Testament, Christ as the fulfillment, the perfect fulfillment of that aspiration, hope, dream, expectation, prophecy, etc. You know, so you find the concrete fulfillment of that thing. You can also look at essentially a variation on what Brian Chappell calls, like, you know, fallen condition focus, right? So what's the problem, the challenge, the sin, the depravity, or what's the fall in this text for which Christ is the redemption? And so, you know, this is helpful when you're looking at texts that don't seem to have much of a redemptive feel to them. Think of like preaching through Judges, you know, where it's just, man, this is just so bleak. It's so dark. It's just depraved. And that's kind of the point, to kind of see what life is like when you have no God that you serve, that everyone does what's right in their own eyes, etc. well, now what's the reverse image of that? How does Christ redeem us from that? How is he the opposite of that? Almost like a reverse image. Looking at practical texts that have lots of imperatives, you can do the sort of law gospel move of, all right, these things tell us what to do. We are to do them. The Lord doesn't blow smoke when he's, giving us his commandments. And so we are obligated to this law, but we also see when we look at this law that we cannot complete it perfectly. So obviously our approval before God can't come from this. So where does it come from? Well, it comes from Christ fulfilling these actions on our behalf. And maybe there's even text where we see him obeying those commandments in the Gospels or something like that. So there's a variety of things you can do. And so, we don't want to get locked into necessarily one move. But I would say sometimes guys are afraid of sounding one note. It's like, and sometimes people will tell you that, this is the gospel every week. They're skeptical. And so I do want to caution against feeling apprehensive about it. Yes, in some ways it is one note because we've got one message. And I wouldn't worry about repeating the same message every single Sunday because your people forget it by Monday. And we need it repeated like every single day. It's a little overblown, the fear of it. It only sounds old to people who are not sensitive to the Holy Spirit. The closer we get to Jesus, the more we long to hear this good news, and the more this good news we crave. So, does some thoughts on kind of in terms of abuses, brother. I don't see. I'd rather some guys awkwardly make attempts. that would make me go, I don't know if that's how you got. If that's how you get there. I think I see far more reticence to even go at it than I do abuses. But I suppose one area could be, kind of a hyper allegorizing or something like that. Spurgeon's really helpful on this in his lectures to my students. He has a chapter or two on spiritualizing the text, and he gives sort of the wrong ways that we do that when we spiritualize or what we might call allegorize a text. But he also gives us some good guardrails for for good ways to spiritualize and to approach. So I wouldn't say I've seen too many abuses, but I think that's maybe a route that can be a danger. I think is if you're just, there's the color red, that's got to be the blood of Jesus, and so we turn it into like a game of Where's Waldo or something like that. I think he's right there.
You should title your next book "Where's Jesus" and just talk about
how to find him anywhere. Well, hey, I want to significantly shift gears because we spend a lot of time talking about preaching because that's what we're blessed to do week in and week out. But I spent 6 years doing youth ministry before I'm now in senior pastorate. And this last week I had a common, I don't want to say issue come up, but when it comes to local church membership and baptism. So I listened to the last episode of the podcast you just put out like a few days ago. I think it was your 300th episode. Congratulations.
I don't know, but
100th? 100th? I saw 300 in there.
Well,
100.
it was Ross. It was me and Ross's 100th episode together.
There you go.
Yeah, but I don't know how many.
Large
total.
number.
Yeah.
A lot. But I was really just encouraged because you're talking about membership and how highly you value membership and treat membership. And I think for me and my pastors here, we're trying to have that same approach. So one of the issues, and I'm bringing this up, so I had a senior high school student make a profession of faith on a Wednesday night a few weeks ago, and then he's going to be baptized this last Sunday. And so I was talking to a youth pastor about the purpose of baptism and if he's going to be becoming a member of our church or if he's just being baptized. And so we kind of got into this conversation again about, is baptism for local church membership or is baptism for the Big C church membership? So when it comes to baptism for you and how you practice it at your church, how do you handle that with students who are maybe visiting grandparents for the summertime? They make a profession of faith at camp, they want to get baptized, but then they're going to be going 3 hours away, or students that can't make it to church, like can't keep the membership requirements? How do you handle baptism when it comes to those kind of issues or situations?
Yeah, well, every, I guess, case would be, could be unique. You might pastorally make a discernment, conclusion for individual folks. But I think normatively, we ought to see baptism as not just an entrance into, the universal church, but really to be a part of the universal church means covenanting with a local embassy of the kingdom, that there's a local church, which the New Testament certainly speaks of the church in its sort of, spiritual or universal, body, but that's a minority reference compared to ecclesia, like the gathering. So when we baptize somebody into the body, as Paul talks about, one baptism, I think we have to see it as synonymous or simultaneous with entering into the local covenant community, if only because, sometimes like theologically, it may be hard to get there. But if somebody is making a profession of faith, I'm going to follow Jesus, and we're administering the covenant sign to them, we're not just saying, all right, you're making a commitment to Jesus now. We're making a commitment to them as shepherds. Like, we're responsible for you. And so to baptize somebody and then somehow not bring them into the flock is to kind of send them off without oversight, without shepherding, which is a dereliction of our duty as pastors. If someone's going to be a disciple of Jesus, they need to be discipled, right? And so, the souls that we are counting, we need to be accountable for. So again, setting aside if there are somehow, individual isolated incidences in which we may make a concession here or there, I think the normative practice for us ought to be, when we baptize someone, we're baptizing them into the life of our church. We're making a commitment to them as much as they are to us or to the, general body of Christ. They're making a commitment to the local body of Christ, because they should have the rights and privileges of membership in the body, if that's what we're baptizing them into. Yeah. And of course that informs, as you guys well know, all sorts of things, like how you decide if somebody's too young or, to be baptized. I'm really open-handed with that. I know there's some places where they have like an age sort of guideline. We don't do that at Liberty Baptist. We just sort of go case by case. Is the profession of faith credible? Can they be a meaningful member of the church? Could they be disciplined? Those sorts of things. And so we don't say, oh, they're a minor, so they can't be a member. We're just we're more so asking, what does it look like for membership for somebody who is under the authority of their parents still? Or what does membership look like for somebody who is not an adult? Can they, appropriately or, vote on, the receiving and releasing of members? Can they understand what's going on at membership meetings? And even among that, there may be some different concessions you could make, right? Where you sort of steward to a member's parents that member's particular ability to engage meaningfully. But I think in some ways it complicates, but also I think it solves that sort of, can you baptize kids thing, which is, can they be a contributing member of your church? Then in addition to, is the profession credible, et cetera. Can they be a contributing member of the church? And if they can't, then that may be a cause for pausing and slowing down and those sorts of things. At my last church, we did not bring into membership everyone who was baptized. That was sort of a down the line adjustment I wanted to make. When I got there was just this list, that beginning with the membership rolls. and then proceeding to adding plurality of elders and clarifying the difference between elders and deacons. And they had this gap where somebody could be baptized, and that was sort of a stage in their spiritual journey. And then joining the church would be a subsequent stage of their spiritual journey. And so I knew that was an issue, and I wanted to close that gap. But it was a model I inherited. I didn't prioritize it above some of these other things that I thought were more pressing. And, I wouldn't say it caused havoc or anything like that. Wasn't ideal. I wanted to get there. There were some problems that arose from that, mainly where you'd have somebody who was baptized who wasn't a member. And then we struggled with if we needed to discipline or like we couldn't, right? And then I would struggle with, how responsible for them am I? If they're not a member of the church, like how, is it just sort of as a Christian brother? Am I really their pastor? Those sorts of things.
I was able to join my church as the pastor, be voted on, but was not yet a member at one point.
Okay.
And a week after I got hired, the pastor came to me. He's like, "Hey, are you gonna join the church?" I was like,
I thought
"You voted on me."
Yeah, I just like to pitch
am I
it.
not?
Yeah. See, when
Am I not here?
when I came to Grayson, they did the same thing where was the pastor at my first Sunday, and I walked forward the next Sunday to join. But what was funny was because my letter didn't get sent till a month afterwards arrived, I conducted 2 business meetings as a moderator where I wasn't even a member of the church. And I went, am I allowed to vote on anything? Am I just supposed to just, step out for these? Sure. I'm not a member.
So organized.
Yeah.
So organized.
Right. There's a to it.
I've got a quick question, or maybe it may not be a quick question, but I have seen an affinity for some people that were previously gospel-centered or would describe themselves in a similar way, say, hey, culture's in such a bad shape. We've got to punch back against culture. We got to, we can't just preach the gospel. We can't just preach verse by verse. Maybe other times that was good, but right now is an exceptional time. How do you pastor folks like that are just so wrapped up in political discourse and cultural discourse that they're not connecting the dots with the gospel?
Yeah, I mean, if it's someone who's a member of the church, there's a couple of fronts, and I think they're both really important, but maybe one is a little more pastoral or direct in terms of that person's spiritual state, like in terms of shepherding. So the first would be, theologically, does that person actually understand what gospel centrality is? It's not gospel onlyanism, where the good news is some kind of magic word mantra that you just, repeat, and that's gonna, be the hammer on every nail. What gospel centrality, in substance, supposes is how versatile the good news is. So it could be that they're failing to make a connection between how the good news applies to that particular thing they're concerned about. So you're failing to see the connection. You're failing to see how the good news actually speaks to that. And that might be a failure on my part, that I haven't preached it well enough, or I haven't explained gospel centrality well enough. Or it could be a failure on their part that they're just not listening, deeply enough or paying closer attention. But theologically, I want to help them see that they may be misunderstanding what gospel-centered is, or they may be misunderstanding, gospel law distinction. They think the law is the solution to some problems and the gospel to others, et cetera. So that's a theological issue, a biblical issue that I want to sort of reason with them from the scriptures. The other thing, though, and perhaps more common, it kind of connects to what I was sharing earlier about spiritual dryness as sort of, an aspect of drift or kind of giving rise to drift, which is when somebody's affections, energy, passions are oriented around something other than the finished work of Christ, they begin to see that thing as preeminent. This is the biggest issue that we will ever face, or this is the most significant thing that challenge. And it doesn't mean that it's insignificant, or that it's not a challenge, or the church shouldn't speak to those things. injustice or whatever, political issues, those sorts of things. But as a pastor, sometimes I want to say, I can see from your spiritual state, from your emotionality, that your orientation around that is not producing the fruit of the Spirit in your life. So just on that level, your focus on that thing, it's made you more irritable, it's made you more anxious, it's made you more impatient with your brothers and sisters, but also just in general. Would you say then that is more important than the peace that passes understanding that comes from, the good news of Jesus? It doesn't mean that that's not important, or that we shouldn't somehow figure out how to address that in the scope of God's mission, or just as an individual having a vocation, a stewardship from the Lord, being drawn to a particular activist issue or something. We have liberty in those areas. But I just, as your pastor, want to say, I have noticed that your focus on that has made you really jumpy, restless, angry. You're lashing out. You're short-tempered. Do you think that is so if that's the fruit of what you're saying we should all adopt that? I just think, like, pastorally, we can address that sort of thing. And that's different than saying, oh, that's not important, or you shouldn't care about that. It's essentially saying that has, unseated Christ is on his throne as the center of your heart and affection. You dwell more on that than you do that Christ is reigning and that his kingdom has come and is coming. And, your affections, that's an idol for you. I think that's a surer sign of idolatry than simply that someone has an interest in a particular area. Political idolatry is not somebody who's interested in politics and that's, they have a focus per se on politics. Political idolatry is, I am so focused on politics that it directs my affections, my emotions. It is essentially my Lord. My allegiance to it, directs how I treat others and respond. And it dominates my thoughts more than, the good news does. Those are all signs of an inordinate focus, a spiritual disorder that I think is appropriate for pastors to address.
That's good. Yeah, it's the similar comfort that comes from J.I. Packer in the sovereignty of God and evangelism. The Lord's going to save his own. In political thought, the Lord is always reigning, and more as the day goes near. It's a comfort, which allows us to be politically involved in a local church, which can be difficult. Yeah. But we've taken enough of your time, Jared. Thank you so much for being willing to speak with us.
Oh, for sure.
The only thing we'd ask of you in closing is, how do we age so gracefully as to get a thoroughly distributed gray across our whole head and face, and not just like in patches? Because I'm worried about that happening to me.
I don't know. Patience, just wait. I don't like it because I can see on the camera right now. I don't know what it looks like in real life, but I've got the white streak right here, and so it looks like I got snot coming out of my nose, but it's just a white streak in my mustache, which makes me think I need to shave that off because that's not attractive at all. So thanks for pointing that out for me, Colin.
No, yours looks good, is what I was saying.
All right.
I have contemplated shaving my beard because it looks like I have food in it. It's different points. So
if you're a baby face, you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. But well, Jared, thank you so much. Very encouraging. Learned something like I always do when I listen to you, and hope it benefited our listeners. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We'll see y'all later.
See you.